Welcome to GG Web Dev. Today we're going to go over JavaScript. Give you a little introduction. So the first question is, why JavaScript? Why do we need it? Well, and the answer is interactivity. So back in the day, static pages showed info, but they were lacking in comparison to desktop interactive apps. And the web needed interactivity to compete with desktops in the 90s. So browser makers raced to compete with desktops and ways to make the web interactive. So the first thing everyone turned to was Java, because Java applets would run anywhere, but the problem was they didn't interact with native HTML pages, and they were kind of slow at first, so there was definitely room to improve. And so then we enter with JavaScript, which took two things from Java, the popular name and the syntax, and just about everything else is different. JavaScript has dynamic typing, prototypical object inheritance, and is a scripting style language, so it's actually very different from Java. In fact, there's such a race to it to build JavaScript and an interactive scripting language for browsers that they actually built JavaScript in 10 days. The goal is to get it out fast and beat out Microsoft because it was built at Netscape, and they didn't want Internet Explorer to win the browser wars. But interestingly, Microsoft reverse engineered JavaScript with all its quirks. That brings us to where we are today. So today in any browser you can embed JS in a script tag and it will run anywhere, in any browser, mobile and desktop. So this is an example Hello World program, just shows an alert box, Hello World, in JavaScript. So we'll go over a little bit of JavaScript syntax and then show you how you can use it. So JavaScript has dynamic typing. That means that type doesn't matter as much, so you can create a variable with var. This creates a variable named a and stores the string hello into it. But then, since the type doesn't matter, with dynamic typing, we can actually store a number into the same variable. So that's the second line. A equals 6. We can store 6 into it. And JavaScript scoping is a little weird. But basically, if you don't include the var in front of your variable, then it doesn't give a syntax error. It actually just makes it a global variable, which can be a little dangerous. So another thing about JavaScript is that it's an event-driven. So functions are first class to the language and respond to events. We can pass around functions and call them as necessary. So, and you can see just some basic syntax for it. We have the function, we say the word function, literally the word function, then the name of the function, then parameters. Obviously don't need types because it's dynamic language. And then do curly braces, insert some statements, and then return. But that's actually optional. You don't have to return anything. So now we can go over a little bit about JavaScript and DOM. DOM is the document object model and is a tree of JavaScript objects parsed from HTML. So each node has a parent and each node can have 0 or more children. So as a simple example of the DOM, we've seen the paragraph element from last time. So what happens to this element when it gets parsed into DOM? Well, there's an element node that gets parsed, which is P. So this tag, and then there's a text node that gets parsed. So this way we can edit the text without actually changing the node. And so what DOM allows us to do is dynamically edit HTML, our HTML page, with JavaScript. So usually the way this works is we'll query the DOM to select some nodes and then modify individual nodes' properties. So we can change like CSS style and content. Then we can also insert and remove children. So, and that's the way we can make our web pages interactive. So, as an example, this is a pretty simple interactive web page. What happens here is we can put in HTML just some simple JavaScript to run when an event occurs. So in this case, we create a button element in HTML with a button tag, and then give it an on-click property of running this JavaScript when it is clicked. So it's really that simple. So you click the button and then a little bit of JavaScript will run. And there's actually, due to some JavaScript scoping, there's actually a vulnerability here. If someone redefined an alert function globally, then we would be calling that global alert function and they could potentially inject malicious code. But we'll talk about that a little more later when we talk about more scoping. We can also create custom functions. So for example, in our JavaScript file, we could put a function named clickMe, which is also global, which does the same thing as from the previous slide. So remember, previous slide we just alerted hello. Here we alert hello in the same way, but then we also use console.log to hello. And then here's so we can call it directly. So we just run arbitrary JavaScript code in the onClick. So another thing we can do is when we do handle these events, we actually get this as the element that was clicked. So in JavaScript, this provides a context to the function that was called. So this allows you to bind a certain object with the function that's being called. So it's kind of like creating a method in object-oriented programming, like Java. But we can dynamically bind this, which is something you can't do in Java. So you can take an arbitrary function and bind it to a context. Anyway, so in these onClick and other events handling functions, the browser will actually bind the element dynamically to your handler function. So we can see that here. So here, when we pass this is the node that was being clicked. We can change the style and set a property of it. So in this case, it changes the color of whatever was clicked to red, and then changes the text with the inner HTML to be just the text clicked. So we can dynamically change and style elements after we get them, but how do we get them? We can get them by ID. We saw in the last presentation you can assign CSS IDs. We can assign unique IDs to elements, so this will get a single element. Then we can also get elements by tag names, so we can select all the paragraphs or divs. We can assign names as well, so we can get so for example, if we were creating a list and we wanted to select the fourth item of the list, using unique IDs can be a little heavy, but we can actually just assign them a name property of like list item 1, 2, 3, and then use that to access specific elements of the list rather than using unique IDs. We can also query CSS selectors and query all CSS selector. So this would get all elements matching my class. This works in more modern browsers. So now that we have a node, how do we use it? Well, the first thing we can do is dynamically bind JavaScript event handlers. So if we got, from the previous example, we had the button HTML have the onClick event handler. Here we can just get the button by using the DOM selection library. So we get the element by ID, get the clickMe button, and then assign automatically its onClick property to be the function that we created from earlier. And some other cool things we can assign besides onClick is onKeyUp, onFocus, onBlur. And this actually allows this actually will bind the button element that we got as this context in the clickMe function. Another thing we can do is change the style and other properties of the button. So This is the same thing as before. We got the button, then now we can button.style.color and assign that a value of green. We can also insert new elements. So if we wanted to create a div, we can create an element of the div, insert some text into it by creating a text node and appending the text node to the div. And then we can insert the new div ahead of the old div. So that's the way we can dynamically generate HTML using the raw DOM library. So I put some example JavaScript, just simple kind of toy examples to demonstrate a little bit. I did a simple type ahead and dynamic background, and you can check out GT Web Dev GitHub to see that. Thanks.